Okay, so hi guys, Matt Rhodes here, and I'm back discussing Strongman on YouTube after, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so out. Honestly, I became a bit disillusioned with the sport, but after a bit of a break, I'm sad to see that there's no real independent journalists come along. So I'm back, and I've brought a couple guests with me. So starting with you, Marcus, if you'd like to introduce yourself for people that are not familiar with you.
That would be a lot of people. Yeah, my name's Marcus Charman. I am the proud owner of Affinity. I came into Strongman, I think about 7 years ago. And since then, probably plagued people, annoyed them with my Marcusisms, but became very, very invested in some of the talent, so to speak, on the way through. And they've become my friends along the way because I've loved the honesty of the sport, which is probably going to get a wry smile. See, I knew it. I knew I'd set that one up. Cal, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Cale Beck. I started competing in strongman in 2008. I competed for a few years as a lightweight strongman, and then as my body started to fail, saw that it needed to transition into everything else, into something else, and started startingstrongman.com, try to make a resource for people to learn more about the sport. And like Matt, got a little disillusioned with the sport at about the same time and stopped reporting on it. So he brought me back because he's cruel like that. So I'll be talking about the sport today.
Okay, and so today we're going to talk about the Shore Classic. Obviously, it's the sort of big, newest show that's kind of broken through and doing big things. So we just start with the fact it was Brian's last competition and he won the show. There was a little bit of controversy about that, which we'll get into. But nonetheless, Brian winning that show against the best guys around today, to me, just shows the level that Brian competed at, and shows, as in with all sports, there are levels to it. And I think Brian and Big Z, and maybe Thor for a short period, were really a long way ahead of the pack. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was always like at Worlds, it was Brian and Z kind of swapping back for a good decade there, just about. And Thor would mix it up, get second in between. And it seemed like we're every year for myself, reporting on the sport back then, I was just waiting for him to kind of get to that point. And fourth was a long ways off. They weren't in contention for the title, but those three seemed like Thor was always on that cusp of doing it, and he'd make some mistake or just wasn't quite, he's filming Game of Thrones or something. And then of course Eddie came in and had a blitz at it and got to that level. And back then it was, you never thought anyone else would get to that upper level, that like a Z, a Marius, a Derek Poundstone. There's just like a little step above. Seems like, I think the overall talent pool is much, much higher now, but I don't know if it's as top heavy as it used to be, where like the top three are maybe even better than people are now.
Totally agree. There's no one in the sport now that's as good as Thor, peak Thor, Big Z.
Yeah.
Nowhere near it. Even if you can compare the results at World's Strongest Man, they brought back some of them, like Fingles this year. At the Arnolds, there's a lot of overlap on events through the years, and you can just see by results there that those guys were ahead of where the guys are now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Eddie got in there too, to his credit, for like a 2-3 year run.
Yeah, certainly when it was statically favorable. Yeah,
of course.
And Marcus, you agree with that? Yeah, it's just kind of levels to it. It's pretty remarkable that Brian is still able, with pretty tough events that he put on at the Shore Classic, to come out on top.
Yeah, when you take into account what Brian did when he came in, you're in at the deep end, and that lad, and he was a kid, you have to sink or swim, and he decided to really just try and swim as hard as he could. And you hear all the stories, the changing of the mattresses, the bringing your own food, the making sure. Now, to some people, that might just be, you're being prissy, you're being a bit of a diva about it. No, you're being professional. And in a thing where you can leave so much to chance, what Brian did is he set a standard. He didn't really care about anyone else. What he did is the right thing as a professional. He cared about his own performances and found levels within the details themselves. So it may come as a surprise to a guy that sort of age for the longevity, but the generations of people that he has competed against and ran through, there is a sort of romanticism that he's allowed, he's bowing out on top. But if you can afford pretty much anyone a certain level of romanticism, it's going to be that man for one thing and one thing alone. He altered the landscape of where so many people were able to accelerate their own careers. 2019 for me will be something of where I watched a guy be magnanimous in defeat, sat on a bus behind me, going back to Bradenton, to our hotel, looking like a kid that has just lost the final after putting his soul into it. But he was still the man that was helping people like the young Tom Stoltman getting ready for Stones. He was still in people's ear and gave his time for other people. So not just a very, very good strongman that looked for levels and details within his own game, but he had time for others in the thick of battle. That to me is what made him a difference between a very good winner and a champion of the sport.
Yeah, well said. So the big news this year was that Brian has bought the rights, or was given the rights, I'm not sure, to the title, The Strongest Man on Earth. When I announced on Instagram that I'm going to be starting this strongman chat, I said the first topic would be the Shore Classic. And I had so many messages saying, don't you mean the strongest man on earth? Or don't be disrespectful. And all I did with those people was send them the link to the Shore Classic Instagram page, which is still the name of it. So the title afforded to the winner is The Strongest Man on Earth. But as it stands, and as it's advertised for 2024, it is the Shore Classic. And it made me realize that I think a lot of people are bigger Brian fans than they are fans of the sport, which is huge credit to Brian because that's what he's done. He's brought all these people in, but a lot of it is his name more so than the sport itself. I think you'll find a lot of the fans that went to the Shore Classic, they're huge, huge fans of Brian. And it's probably what made the audience very lively there, more so than a standard strongman event. The title, The Strongest Man on Earth, was, do you think it's a good idea that Brian has done that, or he should stick with the Shore Classic because his name is so powerful? It seems to have a kind of mixed response.
You're always going to create, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't within this. There's always going to be people that are going to pick their side and have their reasoning to it. That's the beauty of all this. What is best for the sport is down to those that have their reasoning for why they're doing what they're doing. Until we ask those questions, we're never going to know. With what they set out to do with the Shore Classic, the standard, they've accelerated very, very well. Within a couple of years, how the athletes leave the competition for me is always an indicator of how well you run a show. Everyone seems to be happy. They have a fun time just before they leave. It is very much a community stroke family sort of environment towards the tail end, which means we want you back. We value you as athletes. Well, it doesn't matter to me what name comes under, what brand that comes under, what badge that comes under. If the setup is there for the betterment of the athlete to provide a very good show, I think everyone is onto a winner.
Does that confuse things though, where, okay, if you know the sport well, but the more casual fan, if there's the strongest man on earth and there's the world's strongest man, is that a possible form of confusion for people getting into the sport?
I think it just, I'll go for it. I think it's just, it's good marketing. I don't think Brian's the type of person that wants to do anything where he's not the absolute best at. And if you don't think he wants to overtake World's Strongest Man in every metric, that's my personal opinion. Going up, seeing like the first amateur show I ever did was Brian's first pro show. It was a pro-am. and he was competing, and people were shocked that he tied Travis Ortmeyer. So like I've seen Brian from pretty much the start to now, and it's pretty clear he wants to do everything to do it. I don't think he's ever going to be content with anything. So if there is confusion, I think for his Holden branding, that's a good thing. I think it's also was a great thing for him as going out on top, because it got how it got reported on and how SEO works with companies. Like I saw like Men's Health or one of those type of websites, they put Brian Shaw is the strongest man on earth as the title of the article, where it's like Brian Shaw wins the Shaw Classic. It's like, did he have a barbecue? Like, so, I don't think if you're a promoter and you're promoting the Arnold, you're promoting the Shaw Classic, whether it confuses which one's the best, and I think that's the intention. To some extent, you want your show, you're doing a show because you think it's the best. If they all thought Worlds was the end all be all and is the best show it could ever be, why would they want to put on their own show, right? Like they're like, oh no, everything's great. Why change anything? So,
and it leaves that beautiful position of where I think most people at the high end of any sport, whether it be the promotional aspect of things or the competitive aspect of things, you want competition because you want to see details in what others are doing. You want to see, there's always something, when I've come into this, I've come into other sports as well. Matt, you're the same when you've watched things like, come into arm wrestling, come into other sports, because we come from different backgrounds and we have a different, we have a different set of lenses. We see things that others may not. Well, some people may see that as a threat. Some people may see that as the fact that, it makes us look foolish. But those at the very top, those at the, with confidence, and people like Brian, and certainly some of the team that work within Worlds, but when you look at the setup of the kit and the equipment and the team that actually put that together, they'll welcome that because they want advancement. They want things to be better. They want a show. They want something talked about. And I think actually having something which raises your game, which makes you feel like we've got a show on, we've got a competition here, that's a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is I liked it. I like that he got the title, and I think it's worthy with the events that he puts on. However, I think it captured fans' attention much more so because World's Strongest Man appeared on social media to bite back, make little jibes here and there. I think, as soon as Brian won, and obviously, as Kale said, that was in the media, he was strongest man on earth, and suddenly World's Strongest Man are pitting Pudzianowski with Michael Jordan, and there was a huge sort of backlash from fans over that. So I agree with you that I would have thought certain people within World's Strongest Man setup welcomed the competition, but certainly over social media and whoever was putting information out on there, it seemed to contradict that and rather kind of, if anything, belittle what Brian had done.
We have to remember as well, until we know who does it, I've seen similar stuff with the ICC, International Cricket Council, out in Dubai. They have heavily favoured certain countries, but also it's almost like they've let the window, they've left the window open and someone's just come in and had a bit of a tap on the computer because none of it makes any sense. Especially in a realm of where we have instantaneous access to information, so we can have someone with a knee-jerk reaction and they're not thinking. The days of brand identity establishment and engineering are long gone, because things like marketing, things like structure, things like actually putting something in place to have a strategy, everyone can do it because they have a phone. No, there is a skill set that's missing, and you have emotive content being confused now with knee-jerk reactions to things. But the problem is when you go out to 10 million people and that is captured, you don't have time to take that back. And also, you're gauging, if you're not professional in that role, you're gauging the mood of an audience you cannot comprehend. And one tiny little link droplet into that pond all of a sudden adds a taint and a stain to it. So I did see them. I did think it was clunky. I did think it was... I'm not going to use the word unprofessional, because the manner in which some of the things have been reported on come from a position of where it is a voice. It's a person, which also then makes it human. And you know what? I'll encourage that part as well. The issue that you have is if you are going to do that, is you actually have to then come back and be human again and say, do you know what? Maybe on that front, I could do a little more. I could explain the position, because essentially you are the representative of a TV show from 1977 and what that encapsulates. So I encourage the identity of actually giving a human voice, but then you can't pick and choose what aspects of human, sort of nature that you put across. So I say, did see it, did think it was clunky, but does it cause any damage? Not really. This is the thing about the social media aspect. It's a blink of an eye. For most people outside the bubble, it's forgotten and moved on. But maybe it dragged 40,000 people into something they didn't know before.
But I think it played into Brian's hands, because Brian, I think, has done the right thing by keeping pretty quiet. He hasn't reacted to these things, certainly publicly. But I think, I think it made people, perhaps that are on the fence, push them over to Brian's side even more so. You agree with that, Kev?
Yeah, 100%. I think Brian, even throughout his athletic career, has always done a great job of, he projects the exact image he wants to project to fans, to social media, etc. Very rarely do you see him do like anything controversial, or other than like the Arnold poster, which that was like, I was saying all this, then I was like trying to think of an example, and that's probably one of the worst moves I've seen an athlete make in strongman as far as that stuff. But other than that, it's very calculated, very cool. He might think, I don't talk to him, but like, if he thinks something this way, he's going to know, like, I think this is what people would want to see. He's going to project that out. He's really good at that. And I think he's also done that with his promotion of the Shaw Classic. And he's done a really good job with it. And I think that's an issue that strongman promoters have always fallen into. Like, we have amateur federations here, in the United States. And I've said from the beginning, I'm like, just do the things you're doing good and say the things you're doing good. And they get so stuck on just saying that they're better than the other one. And it's like, if you're a business and all you do is bring up your competitor, everyone still thinks about your competitor. Just say, we did this. This is great. We provided this, is a great move in strongman. And Brian's managed to do that, where, from the international level down to the local amateur level here, the ego can't get out of the way of just not like having to say that as promoters. And if he can just stick to that and keep building a show, then other people say, little petty remarks, and you don't fall into that, I think you end up on top.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, you brought up when he tore down the Arnold Schwarzenegger poster from the gym. I was thinking about that because I thought it shows that there is a point where Brian can actually publicly, not necessarily flip, but
make
take
a statement.
And I wonder if that will come at some point with World's Strongest Man, if they continue to publicly go the way they have around the Shaw Classic. It'd be interesting to see. I don't think if he does, he'll do it anytime soon. I think he'll wait till he grows and grows. But I think it shows there's a potential there for Brian at some point to make a big move. We'll see.
Definitely.
I think if they're going to do it, you can see that there's been, every year there's been advice. There's always been something that is added to it. So they are listening. They're building a team. They're taking in information from others. You see the team that they built this year. The detailing. I know things like the pressing event got sort of looked at, but the outside audience need to understand, when you put something on paper, even from a designer's perspective, you put something on paper, it's very hard to envisage that in an arena, bigger, better, and how it looks, especially to a camera. That's where it probably fell down a little bit. But the thing that mustn't be overlooked is that they were trying. They're looking for visuals. They're looking for things that look different. You can tell the energy and enthusiasm that they're putting into these things. My advice from a brand engineer's perspective over the years as well is just drag in eyes from outside the US. Look at things on a more global scale. And that isn't just from a sports perspective. That would actually be through to a viewership perspective on a larger scale, because it's those tiny details and nuances from country to country and where you can draw people into the Shore Classic that's going to be a little bit better than just producing something and say, come and look at us. Bring people in, draw them into what you're doing, and you'll have a far more receptive audience.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on the point there of new events Brian's brought in. First of all, I'm all for new events in strongman. That's, for me, one of the absolute beauties of this sport, that there's no limit to the events that you can have, and we shouldn't be constricted to just the same events over and over. So I absolutely give Brian credit for bringing in these events. As it stands, I think as a spectacle, the leg press with the car looks fantastic. I think it does good. I got to admit, I can hardly watch it when it's going on for fear of an injury there, but I think it looks great. Conversely, I thought the standing press wasn't great. I admire the idea of it, but I felt strongman, the fact that you can have so many crazy implements, so many interesting looking things, to just stand there and press, to me, isn't the right event selection. But how did you guys feel about those two new events? Obviously the leg press was the year before also.
As someone who like works on cars and puts on jack stands and stuff, just the dynamics of the leg press sketches me out, because I don't even, as I get older, like the idea, like I don't like being under a car anyways, even properly supported, let alone it moving up and down. I'm like, oh, it's a heavy thing, but it looks cool. Like, I think it's especially that could be a point towards Marcus. We're an American audience. I think we're very, if you go to a gym, everyone's tried to leg press. I don't know so much internationally how much that transfers over. But we're big car culture as well. Everyone's, we're obsessed with that. I think it works really well visually. The chest press, I like the idea that it was standing. It's a little strange. I think if you're trying to push something away from you, like laying down might work a little better, because it's like you're standing and you're then pressing like a apparatus. But I am also for new events, and I also like that there's more than one pressing event is brought back in a show. I think that was something that was always in strongman, and as we've taken away events, that's come back. As far as, I think one of the criticisms, which we'll probably get into about it, is that when there's two unorthodox events and the contest promoter wins both of them, that kind of adds to that kind of controversy with it, but yeah, overall I liked them. I think it's A for effort, but I'm in the same boat. Like, I prefer the chest press could use some tweaking, but it was a good effort.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just feel that you always have to remember the fans that don't lift weights. Now, everybody can relate to a car being leg pressed. Everybody. But it doesn't matter on the standing chest press if it's 50 kilograms or 350 kilograms or 1,000 pounds. If you're not lifting weights, you don't do that. It doesn't mean anything. So it's just a guy doing that, and it means nothing. That's why, for me, the car is so much better from a spectator point of view than a chest press. What are you thinking, Marcus?
Will be absolutely terrifying to watch, because I'm the same. I think there was a number of us who are hiding behind a couch as if it's the first horror show that you've ever seen. In terms of a visual, I view it from two perspectives. I view it from the perspective as an athlete, but I also view it from a design perspective. And I know that the process that they probably go through. And one thing should be taken into account, and this is no slight on some of the team, because I'm sure that they are very, people. I'm wearing his top, Steve Foshan, one of the guys that's closest to Brian, and a really, really great bloke. But you also have to remember, if you're in that room and that man's putting his money up, his time, Kerry, who's driving for her own, unless it is genuinely in your nature, how do you say no with confidence when someone could be stood there? And this has nothing to do with Brian. This is everything to do with his enthusiasm, passion to get something done, because it's his paycheck, it's his money, and he stands in front of you as this absolute, It's not they're not saying this is a bad thing. A massive child, because he's got a toy that he really wants the world to play with. I've got this brilliant idea. We're going to do this. In that room, those people will be swept along, because until you're in the room with someone that is passionate, pushing through, and they are also iconic in their own right, that changes the dynamic of decision making. You need some special people around, and probably way outside your circle, to be very objective and be clinical in their decision making for a reason. How those came about, I can totally understand, because you say, let's put a truck on a leg press. Fuck yeah. Because that is wicked. All of a sudden, that is just brilliant. What we're going to do is we're going to make a big snakes and ladders out of metal, and barrels are going to come down, and we're going to press it. The ideas themselves formulate, because that's fantastic. Then you have to think about the mechanics of actually producing it, fabricating it, and I'm sure there's compromises. The thing that I don't want to pour water on these things, because it shows that people are trying to think, and it's day one at the races. And so far, if we're up close and personal, I think we have a very different visceral effect between us and that implement, because I think the size of even the chest press, as those barrels are coming down, it's a visually different thing, because scale, we don't see it when it's on a screen because it's already on a screen. But what you've got even in the chest press side of things, you have something which is almost simulating something out of bloody Donkey Kong. It will be more visceral, because you'll hear the barrels, you'll hear the mechanics of it. So you're being drawn into it. I think if you're actually there in the stadium, the arena, you're closer to it. And I can't imagine what that would have been like when they're actually putting that together. And it is very different. You're in, maybe you're in a warehouse, you're in a fabrication shop. You're standing next to something that's probably 25, 30 foot tall. But that then all of a sudden, if you don't have that, brand engineering sort of brain that puts this into perspective of, right, okay, what does that look like on a phone? What does that look like when you're sat on your couch? And that's where it becomes a little diluted. And I say, they're teething problems these people are going to have to go through. But I'm sure Brian being the way that he is, Kerry being the way that she is, they'll find people to give them the advice to help and actually refine. But the main thing is they're starting off on the good foot.
Yeah, agree. Overall, I think we all agree, just credit for trying new events, because it's so important in strongman. And then there's a controversial aspect, which, Kyle, you just touched on, which was Brian winning both of these events, which he had created especially for his own tournament, and just generally competing in and winning your own tournament. Now, of course, Brian fans won't hear of that and will hate it. But if we're honest and we look online at feedback, there's more people that are very happy for him to win, and fair is fair. But there are a lot of comments saying, well, hang on a minute, it's your own show. You're creating new events that you're winning. How do you guys view that overall?
Yeah, I covered when the first Shaw Classic happened. It was 2020. It was very different. They're kind of like in his garage basically, and he won that one. And I said it was great for me to make it legitimate. This is what when I did my recap back then. I said I think it's more legitimate if he doesn't compete going forward. And I still stand by that. I think, then it's just, I've created a show. It stands on its own merit. As a brand, meaning like where Shaw is bigger than the sport to most of his fans, especially in this American audience where we haven't had a successful spectator-based strongman show in well over a decade, maybe since like there used to be like the Mohegan Sun, like a super series, even predates Giants Live when people would pay and there was successful shows. I do think he needed to compete for his fans to care and to build this into what it is. And like you said earlier, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. I still believe, strongman has a long history of people competing at their own shows and somehow always doing really good at those shows compared to everywhere else. And Marcus touched on, he has all these people when he's coming up with events. Who's going to say no to him? If you're all of your friends or all the referees, everyone you bring in, it's just, it is a point of contention. I don't think he did anything wrong by it, saying all that. And I do think it was what was necessary to grow it. And I'm going to be very interested to see how it does going forward without Brian. I think maybe he set up enough of a built enough reputation on it for it to go. He's championed these other athletes to bring them up, that the fans care about them. They've met them for the past, 3-4 years going to it, I guess 3 years spectators. I think it can. I don't think it would have taken off if he would have not done it, not competed. But I still do think it's a more legitimate, like, stands on its own merit if the person who's named after isn't competing in it. But I do think it was also necessary for him to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the thing about strongman, which a lot of people don't realize, is it's all about the events. And it's so easy for the events to look like they're random, but really they're not, just to suit one person, a couple people, or to not suit certain people. It's so easy. All of us that follow strongman, the three of us, could bring 10 athletes. We could put on a set of events that we could be fairly certain how it's gonna pan out. And that's the issue. But I agree, you had to have Brian in these to help kickstart the Shore Classic. And I do think that will be a huge challenge going forward, trying to keep it successful without him competing, because strongman has a real failure in developing characters in the sport. It concentrates just on a few people. Brian's done his own work to get himself the popularity that he has, but there's amazing personalities in this sport. But let's be honest, people don't really know about them. Look at when these people start YouTube channels and things, you see there's just not that mass interest. And that's a huge issue, I think, going forward. And such a tough thing for Brian to try and continue with his event without him in it. How do you see that, Marcus?
Well, the whole thing coming in and say, I came from very different sports. Soccer, obviously, even from the age of 14, you will be in rooms with people that are teaching you how to be media savvy. They're building your brand presence at an early age. They're preparing you for a professional life. Within county cricket, going to international cricket, again, you're being prepared by international cricket boards for being a professional and how to be there front and center, how you behave. Everything's detailed. You're left to your own devices. And as much as people say, well, I have a coach for this, the teams are too small because of the money. The money will increase, but there has to be a look at how you handle yourself professionally. We've seen, the likes of Eddie Hall, who's turned himself into a brand, good, bad, and indifferent for some of the bits and pieces, but ultimately, he's successful. The person that I would credit for being one of the most professional, and this is a controversial point, but Cal will be on my side on this one as well, is that Robert Oberst was a professional strongman. Because people may look at it and say, right, okay, he didn't do very well in a lot of competitions. No, this was his profession. He made this his job, and he did very, very well at it because that was his job. When other people are having to be on pipelines, road construction, scaffolding, he was one of the first people to turn it into exactly what it should be. He was professional. The way that Brian's gone about this is very different. So there's lots of things that people could look at. Going back to the point when it comes down to the events and the things that Brian won, what we can't overlook as well in any strongman competition, and I don't think it should be overlooked as well, is how well Brian did as an overall against, as we say at the moment, we have maverick phenom talent in people like Mitchell Hooper that are coming through. And he ran him. When you think about what he was able to do on the day, he was second to Tom Sontman in stones by 3 seconds. Brian's a veteran. Tom is still a child that is growing into the sport and has the world at his feet. But he ran him and eclipsed everyone else. And then you look at some of the other events as well. This is a guy that is, as I say, is his last ever competition. Take his name off it. Don't worry about that. Look beyond that. Look at what that man did with that body after those years, after those competitions, to that extreme nature, and see how well he performed as an athlete on the day, because what he did was special. He was able to elicit something from his body, entertain a crowd, draw people in. And do you know what? As I say, romanticism even aside, He earned a win.
But look, I mean, we've just talked about Brian, Eddie, Oberst, but these guys aren't there anymore. And this is the issue, isn't it? We're now left with these guys, and Brian's going to be left with competition with these guys that have nothing like that reach. And is it a responsibility now of Brian, the Shore Classic, to promote some of these guys, use his social media to let people learn about these personalities? Because at the end of the day, if fans don't have a reason for wanting someone to win or to lose, which was in the case of Oberst, it could be both ways. But if they have that, they're engaged. But without it, we know these guys personally, but most people don't. And then it gets difficult to really root for someone.
Yeah.
I'll just jump ahead, Cal, this one, just because it's a quick point for me. And that is it the responsibility of Brian and his team, or is it the responsibility of Worlds? Maybe to a point. But if you as an athlete are sat there not seeing that this is an opportunity, knowing what the game is, then you're failing yourself, because there is opportunity. You don't have to be a caricature. You don't have to be larger than life. There are people within this that are drawing an audience and love from fans for what they are. You've only got to look at Trey Mitchell. You've got a very unassuming Texan from Lumberton that is a God-fearing man that stands there and just does the work. That man's audience is building because of one thing and one thing alone: integrity. You've got buy-in. You don't have to follow the blueprint of someone else. But if you are sat there kind of on the sidelines, kind of like a little bit of an also-ran, and thinking, right, what can I do? Be yourself to an extreme level. Push the limits of what you do. Engage. And that's where you can be a bum on a seat. And if you're a bum on a seat and you draw people in, you have a career.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I was even myself as an amateur lightweight, I saw it from a very early time. If I want to have any success in the sport, not necessarily competing, but if you compete in this, it takes a lot of your energy and time. You got to get some sort of return on it. You have to put yourself out there and do it. And I think I was able to do well early days on this. And I just went around to all these athletes. I'm like, do this. Like, I know what I'm doing and no one's doing it. And it's not that much stuff. You just kind of have to be yourself and put it out there. And I do think Worlds has done a much better job with that as of late. Giants Live has done a much better job of late. If you want to promote these athletes, and Shaw Classic, they're going to say, we don't have Brian this year, but we have all these other people. It is in their best interest to be bringing them on to his YouTube channel, building up to it, who's doing what, getting some clips, because that's how the promotion for all of the other Shaw Classics have been, on his YouTube channel. That's the big driver of all this. So he has to, if he's not competing, he's got to show some behind the scenes stuff that's getting people interested. He's got to show clips of everyone. He's got to turn something into, another Giants Live, how they've been doing a good job. And I think as the athletes, it is all on yourself in the end of the day, though, because let's say you do have to do that. And like Oberst, they're just like, he's just himself. I can tell you that as someone that did the first competition with him, and talked to him about it. We drove up to the first ever Shaw Classic ever, which was an amateur one. We drove from California to Colorado and did it. And, it's like a 10-hour drive. And we just talked about how anyone can market themselves in this sport. Because at that point, no one really was. There was like the Mariusz Pudzianowskis and stuff, but like that was pre-social media. In the social media era, no one had been successful in the sport yet. And we had, I can't tell you the hours of conversation Oberst and I had about that kind of stuff. And I see the biggest mistake that the strongman athletes make is they see, oh, Robert Oberst was able to get hundreds of thousands of followers doing this, so I'll act like that. People spot the bullshit. If you're acting like a caricature and that's not you, it's never going to work. You got to figure out whatever you are and just be a little amplified version of that.
Yeah.
Trey Mitchell is Trey Mitchell.
Yeah. Well, take for Eddie, Brian. They're completely different characters. They're not the same, whatever, but they all got to a huge level. So it just shows, as you say, if themselves, but they've got to get out there and show it.
Yeah.
And the best way is collaborate. The best way to see those as real people, because people won't get Brian's sense of humor, but you put him with Eddie, he's fucking hilarious, because that's who Brian is. He's got one of the best sense of humors going. Don't be formulaic. Don't, as Cal said, don't follow a blueprint that you've seen before. No one wants to see people sitting there eating fucking chicken wings anymore. You know, be yourself. Let people in. Do you know what? Expose yourself a little bit, because
you stopped watching Eddie Hall's channel then, have you?
Oh, a long time ago. The tank pushed me over the edge.
You know, but I think also it's another point, I think, for the Shaw Classic, and one of the reasons, like we were talking earlier, like Brian, to this fan base that went to the Shaw Classic, is bigger than the sport in America. They're Brian fans first. That's drawn them into strongman. You know, I run the Starting Strongman group on Facebook, and we have a questionnaire to make sure people aren't bots. So I get a lot of intrigue on, like, it says like, what's your favorite event, or like, how did you find out about the sport? And it's interesting, you see that, and people will be like, Brian Shaw, strongest man on history. Like, so I get a little insight on like how people are finding about the sport. And then they're like, I just knew it was a thing, but I didn't know about it until I saw Brian's YouTube channel, because it's everywhere. It got recommended to me on my kid watches all kinds of YouTube. It got recommended some Brian Shaw video, and I'm like, my account. But no, and they got really lucky. They had the strongest man in history show on the History Channel, you know. So it's, and what Brian did to capitalize on that by having his own videographer and having like the History Channel pay for all of them to fly all over the world, be together, and film all the behind the scenes going to the gym together. He got basically the History Channel to foot the bill to build his YouTube off of that. And it showed a dynamic with all of them, and stuff. Like, you know, I don't, no strongman could have worked that out. Like, hey guys, and Nick as well. Let's all four of these people travel all over the place, doing different things, interacting, eating together, going to the gym. They couldn't have afforded that, but they were in the same place, but they all were. And Brian was the one smart enough and had the forethought to have a videographer to film it and putting it up. So, and it just shows that, like, it was basically turned it into a whole reality show. And that's kind of what strongman needed, for someone like, we all knew about all these people, and they're like, why does no one know about this? Then once they just get enough of that exposure, they take off. We've seen it before.
He can be a very good catalyst for it as well, because again, as you know, being in Brian's company, he is exceptionally passionate. He's a really, really nice bloke. He really is. He's a gentle giant of a man who's very, very funny. He's got a great sense of humor. And one of the best things I've seen of late as well, because it is, he invited one of my sort of best mates in the sport over. I got to see Graham Hicks be Graham Hicks, which you rarely get to see. I know what Hicks is like in the company. I know what he's like to train with. I know what he's like to sit and eat with. But when he was over with Brian, and sometimes you see, quite a dour version of what you think Graham is, you get to see him basically dick about, and Brian got the best out of it. That's one of the things that I would encourage wholeheartedly. Be a catalyst for these people to be free and actually express themselves, because always the nicest thing is when you're in the inside circle of like a professional sport or a professional anything, is you get to see something the outside world doesn't. But if you can drag people in, show them character, show them nature of people, you get buy-in, because that's where your audience comes from. Not everyone is going to like a Trey. People are going to like larger than life characters, which is why you might side with someone like Evan, who's this explosion of a character, but it's still Evan. And showcasing that and putting them together as a dynamic. I think he started off on the right foot. The more he does, the more he looks at this from a brand objective perspective, and being able to plan ahead, how to pair people up, how to gauge characters and what to sell naturally without, compromising the integrity of an athlete, and also what you see in front of you. They will be able to grow this. It will be very, very organic in the way that it can happen, but it will actually get a buy-in from people way outside the sport. There is scope to do it. It just needs a bigger picture brain to be able to put this together now.
Yeah, I think by nature of the sport, where it's a group of guys that keep coming together and it's friendly in nature in terms of generally everyone gets on, supports each other. I think it's very hard then for them to flick the switch of trash talk and big personalities saying they're going to beat this person, beat that. Because you see it in other sports, in boxing, in the arm wrestling, everyone's comfortable doing it. But it seems to me that the guys are finding it difficult to flick that switch, and that's part of the problem. And therefore, you can argue it's becoming a bit boring because everybody's too nicey. Eddie
I
Hall
don't think it.
was willing to do it, but he could back it up. But of course, it's very difficult to talk like that if your results aren't backing it up. And strongman's a sport where you can win one and then lose 10 and then win another.
I don't think it's a case of that. If it's not in your nature, it's not in your nature. You know, Evan will stand in front of people and tell. He knows what he wants to say. He knows what Mitchell Hooper will be exactly the same. He's, apart from Mitchell Hooper, would do it in a very blueprint manner. You know, you can't elicit something from. You know, Tom Evans, I think, is going to grow into this brilliantly. I really do. I think there's something just waiting to burst out of that lad. You know, Maxine, he's coming back. Alexi will always be Alexi. Gav will always be Gav. You know, Tom will always be Tom. When we go back even to the Marius years, he stood out for one reason, because he was so different. He was so competitive, and he did not give a shit about anyone else. As he tapped Poundstone on the shoulders as he fucked the stone up. That's why every once in a while you just need the one, that black diamond. Not everyone has to be something other. You sometimes need the black diamond to make the others look a little bit, you know, refreshing or different, or, you know, to show the clarity in them. So
I do think though that the one thing with like Marius, even with Eddie in the time he was talking big, they were winning, you know, they were right there. I think if people do that and they're not winning, it can come across very differently to fans, just maybe arrogance, and then, you know, they doubt themselves perhaps because they lose popularity because they're giving it all of the talk without actually backing it up. I think that is the one thing different.
Mitchell's doing it.
Yeah, but he's winning right now. That's
exactly. He'll talk ahead and tell you exactly what he is going to win. He just does it in a very robotic format.
Mm-hmm.
Next Canadian format.
Yeah. Talk about different personality to JF. But next thing, of course, the big question people say or suggest is that the Shore Classic will soon be much bigger than World's Strongest Man. World's Strongest Man, for all its faults, and in my opinion, it has many, it's still the most important strongman competition out there. And that's because of the reach that it has to a mass audience. I found strongman through World's Strongest Man, as many people did, because you're watching it on TV, the masses are watching. You know, if there's many people, millions that have seen World's Strongest Man that have never seen the Arnold Strongman Classic, never seen the Rogue Invitational. Now, if Brian gets the Shore Classic televised, perhaps then there's a chance that it can get to that kind of scale. But unless it ever does get to the major networks, I can't possibly see how it can be competitive. Amongst hardcore fans, they can feel that it's better, but otherwise, no way. And the problem is, you're taking on World's Strongest Man, who are owned by, I believe, the biggest, richest media power in the world. And to try and take them on is nigh on impossible if they don't want you to. Is that the way you guys see it?
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, I don't think people understand the backing Worlds has, who it's owned by. Like, you know, they're like one of the biggest companies in the entire world. They own the UFC.
Yeah, so getting bigger. Endeavor is the overall.
Right. Yeah, that's why I didn't even want to say the name, because it was IMG. It was like they keep getting bought up and building a bigger company that it's constantly changing. There is a way that can almost be a downside, though, is because you're so detached from the common fan that if you lose enough of the sense of the athletes, they feel better over here, they're going to want to go over here. Over here, I think, we kind of saw that with the IFSA thing, even though, in the grand scheme of things, no one even remembers IFSA. looking back, like, but it was a disruptor. You know, we've had similar things with with WUS and stuff, but in the end, there can be a little, you know, blip down. World still stays on top. Whether they get hit a little bit, they stay on top just because they don't need to be profitable. Like they're such a big company.
Yeah,
It's just completely unnecessary.
I'm making this up right now, but I want to say they're worth approximately 14-15 billion dollars. That's for people that are unaware how big Endeavor are.
Yeah. I would say for the Shaw Classic, you know, but I think there is still a lot of monetary gain and, you know, just overall gain in being considered by the, you know, the fans, the people that follow it word for word to be the best. I do think I think for someone like Brian, that probably matters more than, you know, having, you know, your grandma and grandpa watch it at Christmas time. If like the people that know, then who is the, you know, I think some would say that makes it the best. If like the people that actually follow the sport, live the sport, breathe the sport day in and day out think it's the best, then it is. I do think I don't think having a live stream that is paid is going to help them get to that point, because you're limiting the audience right there. I
And
understand why they
Rogue
do
and
it.
Arnold are both free streams, right?
Yes, and I think that makes it huge because anyone could, you can just pop on YouTube. If you watch some Brian Shaw videos, you might get your recommended video. Watch this Rogue Classic going on right now. And again, I think that's because they don't have to be as profitable. They can just sunk the money. It's all advertising. But I think that's a big advantage. I just don't think the pay-per-view model, as far as the growth, the eyeballs on it, works really well. You need the least barrier to watchability as possible, and that's why something like the Rogue or the Arnold could overtake Worlds, because it's just live on YouTube. It's easy to get. They cut it all up. They put it event by event. It's there forever. People are going to stumble upon it. You know, like YouTube browsing is like the new reruns. You can find a Rogue from 2020 or 2019 and watch that deadlift event. It pops up, then you're going to watch every other one right after that. But World's Strongest Man's a tough one to get past, and I don't think they will, but I think you can still be considered the best without that. But you need the barrier of entry for watchability to be easier.
I agree with you. Amongst strongman fans, no doubt Shaw Classic could become the best, but a lot of fans are thinking that it's going to take over for World's Strongest Man. I think underestimate the power that World's Strongest Man have.
It's not just monetary either. It's that if you apply a logic to this, if you were going to sit around a table and just say, right, okay, what is it we're going to do? So if I was just to ask you guys as well, the Rogue, the Shaw Classic, you know, WUS, what were they? What were you competing in? You're competing in a sport. Am I correct?
Correct.
That's what you're selling to a larger audience.
Mm-hmm.
World's Strongest Man isn't.
Yeah, it's an entertainment show, isn't it?
Exactly that. So this is where World stands apart, and this is where, if you did want to try and go, not necessarily to war, but if you try and overtake and work your way in, this is a far bigger job than just money. This is clout, clarity, and understanding the audience for what would be decades of brand establishment. And people aren't prepared for that because they're still looking at this as if you're taking on like for like, and you're not. Yeah. You know, the beauty of what they've created over the years and the audience they have for this allegiance is very much, and Matt will be aware, you can play in lots of different things, but you can never devalue the FA Cup, what that will be to a soccer player. They can have any form of identity grafted to it. They can put any sponsor to it. But what you are buying into is you're buying into history. And that's what they have aligned to. When it is entertainment, there is something more than it just being a sport. Because sportsmen come and go, but this is all part and parcel of what has been years of fabric, tying families down at Christmas time, so on and so forth, and what it means. The sports themselves will grow. If you are trying to take on and you're trying to supersede something that you yet can't even comprehend, you're going to struggle. So the best thing you can do is just have a focus of what you want to give, build into it a leave behind, call it a legacy, whatever you want to do. Focus on athletes, focus on the entertainment value within your sport, but don't try and take on something like Worlds, because that's creation of the earth itself. There is a fluke to it, and it is built and evolved over time. To try and take that on would be foolish.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance, if the Shore Classic continued to grow as it has, and Brian did consider or TV deals, or they came in for him, do you feel that could trigger contracts coming back into the sport as we saw with IFSA?
I think it's tough, a lot tougher to do in today's age. I think we kind of, it skirted around that. Like, I think there's a lot of talk about that being a possibility when, WUS was going on, or maybe it was a possibility, or reality. That all comes down to money, right? Is Brian or Endeavor willing to put up the money for that to be worth it to them, to hold on to like Tom Stoltman? Do they want to give him a couple $100,000 a year to only compete there? Then it would. But again, in Strongman, the money's not always there. So I think, and they're kind of in such different avenues. I don't think that Worlds cares too much. They're such a different entity. Like we're saying, like, why even try to compete with them? I think they also realize we're a whole different thing. We've done this before. Half the people didn't show up and life went on. We're fine. So, I think they always say, like, what is there, 25 big guys? There's always 25 big guys that'll be willing to go compete for a week.
Yeah.
The way to go about it, like if I was part of Brian's team or sat there, the way that I would go about this is I would focus on building the sport, but look at the opportunity for entertainment. So as we've said, we're trying to market athletes, we're trying to market characters. The UFC, when they put together these little fight schools back when you had the likes of Tate Fletcher coming through, oh God, what's his name? The black guy with the band, with the Kimbo Slice.
Yeah.
You brought people through. So what you did is you had a very, very serious sport, but you had entertainment grafted into it. And that's a really clever play. If I was part of Brian's team, I would be looking at structuring something along that, because that is where your revenue is going to come in. That's where your brand identity can be spread, and you can engineer and alter deals with individual people for image rights. You can start to look at the bigger picture. Have the sport as the little pinnacle bit at the top. That's what you compete for. But actually, your moneymaker is going to be in those people. It's taking the rough diamond and added polish to it. There's a multitude of ways that you can do that. There's a multitude of companies of where you can get athletes from all over the world. We've got Georgia, in Constantine, being in his company for 5 minutes. The man's hilarious. He's brilliant. People don't know this. There's so much scope. There's so much scope for sponsorships with these people and growing them. I would look at that as a way to grow this.
Last question. Which of the major competitions is the best for determining who really is the strongest man in the world? So if we take World's Strongest Man, Shore Classic, Arnold Strongman Classic, Rogue Invitational, I think those are the big ones, right? Which one would you say decides the strongest man in the world, the strongest man on earth, whatever you want to call it, the best strongman out there?
If we're just looking from like a scope of like, a long scope, not just like the last year, I think it's still the Arnold. Overall, if I was just to pick one, if we're just like, a 5-10 year scope, I'd say the Arnold's the most consistent in that.
Yeah, I would agree, definitely. I've always felt the Arnold Strongman Classic champion is the strongest man in the world. I would say that the last couple of years is the weakest I've ever seen the Arnolds, in my opinion. The year before, we had some guys zeroing multiple events. It was hard to watch, I would say. This year, it was probably one of the least competitive Arnolds I've ever seen, in all honesty. And I love the Arnolds.
Sure.
But yeah, I'd agree overall the Arnolds, but the last couple of years is
Yeah,
put it
maybe on
down
the
to my
decline.
mind.
I'd still
Yeah,
like from their track record, I'd still put them up. But if the Shaw Classic's going here, the Arnold's going,
yeah.
you know,
And where'd you put the Rogue into that, Cal?
it's pretty similar to the Arnold. You know, the structure is pretty similar. Um, it's just it hasn't been around as long, so it's hard to say. I don't think there's been like a champion repeat, you know, winner like Zadrunas was for the Arnold that kind of to me cemented it. You know, winning it so many times, kind of showing the domination. I kind of look at the Rogue, even though it isn't, as like an off-season Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I kind of lump them together, even though I know they're separate. Rogue has such involvement in the Arnold now. It's like it's
Yeah.
hard for me to differentiate them.
Yeah. Well, there's even an overlap with some of the events that they have, like the Wheel of Pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a case that you've got to have the best athletes there, haven't you? And we haven't seen Martins, we haven't seen Mateus at Shore Classic, for example, yet. And that's
Right.
also a factor. You've got to have the best guys competing for then to say who's really the best. That's something that Brian has to sort out. But Marcus, what have you got right now as the show that
Yeah,
determines?
it's difficult to say. It's in terms of the weight, you're always going to go with the Arnold because it's the most challenging, it's the heaviest one, and ultimately you're looking for the strongest person.
Mm-hmm.
But again, people aren't there, so this is where pathways, so on and so forth, it gets very political, very hard to establish because you could have a Zadrunas on the sidelines. He's not invited, but someone stood there with a trophy. The truth of the matter is that athlete knows what the crack is as well. The next few years are going to be important. I think in the next 2 years you will have legitimate people standing there saying, "I am the strongest in the world," because there will be a push for that because we have names and names alone. You want that legitimate nature to be built into what you're doing, and I think it will come. And I reckon in the next 2 years we'll find that.
I think it is a danger because sports need a champion. The one thing that's really hurt boxing is you have like 3 world title belts and you have 3 champions. It's a real problem for a sport. People want to know and all agree on who's the champion, right?
Yeah. And I'd say that there's a problem with strongman where it really helped if someone was so dominant for so long, or if even if it's just one or two, it makes it easier for the fans to go, it's Brian Shaw, it's Zadrunas, or it's Thor, it's Eddie Hall. And it really melds it down to that, like when you say arm wrestling, it's just that one-on-one kind of thing where I guess Mitchell Hooper's been as dominant as anyone ever has. But for me, it just, I don't know. Overall, it seems like the reception of that is different. Maybe because he came on so fast, so soon. It doesn't seem that, even though he, like, if you look at it stat for stat, he's like more dominant than a lot of these people were in their time. It doesn't feel that way in like in your heart, if that makes sense.
I agree. Okay, guys, we'll leave it at that. I appreciate both of you coming on here. You're both a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, I hope we shared some useful thoughts for the fans. And we'll look forward to everybody's comments. Let us know what you think, guys. And yeah, we'll be back with another Strongman chat next week on another topic. So yeah, thanks again, guys. And we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks.